you know.
Good morning, Chris.
Stephanie, how are you? Happy Thursday to you. You're looking beautiful as always. How was your
So are
life?
you. So are you.
Thank you. My
I
hair
haven't
looks
talked to you
good.
for a while. We
I
haven't
know,
been
it's
on
been
an
a
episode together for a while. Did you watch the Super Bowl?
I did. I did watch the Super Bowl.
Did you hear that about Bad Bunny's new song that he put out about a tortilla? Actually, it's more of a rap.
What does a fish say when it hits a wall?
Ouch.
Damn.
M?
Fish hits a wall. Damn.
Oh, damn.
It took you a really long time to get what I consider to be one of the stupidest dad jokes ever.
I heard M.
No,
And I'm
damn.
like, damn. What does that even mean?
That's just my
You don't like my
my Texas mouth, right? I can't speak, so it's fine.
Well, okay. I forgive you.
We're crushing it this morning, Stephanie. Crushing. Life is going great.
Okay, well, I do have another question for you. What if the growth that you're celebrating is the thing that's breaking your company? Alex Turnbull scaled Groove. Do you remember Groove? Past 5 million in annual revenue, then watched support response times triple overnight. The systems that built the company couldn't carry it. Today on How to Founder, we're going to be talking about the curse of success and when growth actually creates problems. I'm your host, Stephanie Hayes. With me is my wonderful co-host, Chris Franks. And we are going to dive into this topic, which is a good one. So, Chris, a lot of founders are going to assume that hiring more people solves these growth bottlenecks, but where does that assumption sort of break down in the companies that you've been working with?
You have to manage more people.
I mean, there's that for sure.
I mean, it becomes the fundamental thing, which is, I suddenly have, and let's take this from a founder's perspective. Typically, this is around the A round, sometimes the B round. You're moving into a growth phase of the company. You've already figured out, maybe you've wiggled a little bit as far as your direction goes, and you've figured out product market fit, and things are starting to go, and you're growing very fast. Whether that's through your own revenue, whether it's through funding, whatever. And then suddenly you have to become what was just kind of a flat company. You have to become a big company very, very fast. And all the infrastructure that goes with a big company. You have to have management. You have to have systems. You have to have processes. You have to have technology. And that oftentimes breaks. It breaks your company as you're growing through that phase. And I think probably most importantly for founders, it's when your culture that you've worked so hard to create in those early phases starts to show very firm cracks. That's my thoughts. What do you think?
I think that the problem is that you start to experience things that you didn't anticipate. So with volume and with growth, even if you have thrown people at the problem, there are things that you just didn't even know that were going to happen once you start to hit more volume. And you run into financial roadblocks and you run into service roadblocks. Like service is a great one because, all of a sudden you've got all these customers who are asking questions or need help or what have you. And like, that's just another great area where I see a lot of companies kind of flounder, right? But like, do we fix the process or do we fix the people problem first?
I don't know. I think it's actually a really nuanced and difficult question, is to say, Do more people on your team start to solve some of these problems? Yes, if they're the right people. But one of the really hard pieces of this, Stephanie, is that you have to go in and identify and hire experts who are still comfortable in a very fluid, dynamic environment, but are still good at things like, I don't know, HR, like hiring people or identifying the right people or writing an HR manual or something like that. And that's an incredibly difficult time. You had like early on, finding a few people that want to do everything. I don't want to say it's hard, but I think it's easier than then starting to find functional experts that are still very comfortable with the chaos and creating order out of chaos.
I think that there's a bigger problem on the people side because when you're in high growth, everything's moving really fast, right? And you have a lot of people that are moving through their jobs really quickly. So you lose a lot of, like, you have a sieve there in terms of knowledge and knowledge management. And so you're constantly retraining people, or you're losing some of that inherent tacit knowledge that existed with the people who were there first, right? And then you've got all of, inevitably a founder gets to this growth phase and they're like, oh, we need to put all of these things in place that a big company has, but they're not ready for it. And so when there's this hyper focus on one area of the company when you're in high growth, it is at the detriment of the rest. Like I am thinking of an example of a kind of a startup that I know about that they added 500 people in 6 months.
Holy crap.
Like, there's just no way that that's going to be okay. And we're not talking this is a big organization where 500 people is like nothing. This is a startup, right? They had, I think, 100 people before that. So inevitably, everything imploded, and they had to let go of 300. Right? So what happened there? It was not being prepared to do what you needed to do with those people. It was, you can't just shove them into jobs and all of a sudden it just all works, right? There is inherent knowledge that has to be developed within the organization, and people need to understand what they're stepping into, and that infrastructure just wasn't there. Where have you seen that happen?
I think, and it's a good question, because what immediately pops into my mind is, all right, practically what breaks? So if you're in scale up mode, what breaks? And you just said growing too fast, right? Having too many people too fast without the infrastructure. So if you're breaking that down, and again, to answer your question directly, this is what I've seen. There's not job descriptions. You're basically moving from a flat organization to a departmental organization. If you're hiring that amount of people, unless you're Jensen from NVIDIA, I think he's got like 50 or 60 something direct reports, right? Or Steve Jobs back in the day. You're going to have a reporting hierarchy. And so you start to then have departments. Within those departments, the people that lead those departments may or may not be good managers. It's a different skill set than being somebody that's early in the company and just somebody that's going to go get shit done, right? You actually have to manage humans, and you have to try to figure out task delegation, all the things that managers do. And then the second piece of that is, so you move into departments, people don't know what they're doing, they don't know how they function, et cetera. But I think one of the real most dangerous parts, and this is what I saw, and there's one really good example in my mind, I won't bring them up because of miserable failure of a company, but silos start to be created even in small companies. And that is devastating for a small company when you have 100, maybe 200 people, and you have 3 departments and none of them talk to each other. That is a very, very dangerous time. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think so. And, we can't underestimate. I mean, this is why we build our business. It's exactly around how teams grow in high growth companies, right? Can we apply all of the old thinking around teams to these types of organizations that are just like in rapid growth mode? And so I think that beyond just job descriptions, it's more about job architecture and thinking about who you hire not based on functional roles, but based on who this person is. Like I know in my organization, I need a commander and I need a fact finder and I need a connector in each of my teams. So I want to hire for those skills as opposed to for some type of functional technical skill, right? Certainly we need those as well. But thinking about teams differently rather than just like the functional hierarchy is super important. And these are teams that have to cross pollinate at this stage. They have to be able to build their own knowledge base, they have to build their own processes. And so it doesn't work to stick a whole bunch of people into rigid frameworks at this point in time. So I guess that sort of comes back to the question of, do we build people or processes first?
Yeah, the thing that, and I think it's really an important point you just brought up, because in the traditional approach, I'm getting, all business school here, but in the traditional approach, the decision you have to make is whether or not you form cross-functional teams or verticalized teams. That's a very real decision. So, if you think about it from a software perspective, you put all the UX people on one team, and you put all the backend engineers on another team, and you put all the QA people on another team, then you have to figure out a way for work to flow between them. That would be a verticalized organization. And then a horizontal one would be where you do cross-functional teams. The reality is that neither of them work for exactly the reason you were just saying, right? What I'm talking about is a functional organization. And what you're talking about is a human-centric organization, which is a very different approach than we grew up with. It was like, hey, we don't really care about the people in the room. We care about the job to be done and the task to be done. And what you're suggesting is something that's a new way for us to look at teams and overall organizational design is this idea of the actual humans that are in the room. So press on that just a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you can dig into this stuff and read like humanocracy and holacracy and all of those sort of human-centered design structures, but it kind of makes like a lot of sense, because when I don't know if you're familiar with organizational network analysis, but this is this practice of, you can actually go into the organization with technical tools and you can map out what I call the deer trails inside of the organization. So we may have a functional hierarchy, but the true patterns of communication, of collaboration inside of the organization can be pulled out from observing who's talking to who most, who's working with who most. Like, what are those actual patterns of collaboration inside the organization? You start to look at that and you start to see a really different like blueprint of how the organization is kind of self-organizing. And pay attention to that, because there's a reason why you're missing something, right? You're missing who needs to work together more, who naturally works together more. And there's this whole other dimension to team design that is so far beyond the functional work that we have to pay attention to, or else you end up with these silos, like you said. I come from, we were dyed in the wool and the waterfall software development methodology, right? And then I became certified in building DevOps teams. And DevOps is like the agile, full commitment to cross-functional teams. And you build teams around like basically value streams inside the organization. And so is there any one perfect way of doing this? No, but DevOps is like the next step towards understanding that people are working towards something and they want to be focused on what they're doing, what they're contributing to the organization, as opposed to what functional role they do. And so, when you have all of this, like, throw it over your shoulder, over the wall to the next person, you're missing the important integration that all of these roles inside a small company need to have with each other. Because so over here, you've got a developer maybe who's seeing that there's something going on within the product. And then over here, you've got a data person who's looking at the data and going, oh, all these people are doing this thing when they're using the product. And then you've got a salesperson over there who's just trying to get more people in, and nobody's talking to each other, right? Like, nobody is collaborating on the actual design and development of whatever it is you're producing and selling to people. And so that sort of cross-pollination is so important in a company this size. And if you're not facilitating that, you're going to die, right?
So you just hit, if we're trying to list out the things that are most dangerous, bless you, trying to look at the things that are most dangerous, we've hit, just in this early part of the conversation, we've hit people, we've hit process, we've hit design, and now you just hit one that is incredibly important, of communication. And communication meaning communication in every direction, cross-team communication. Overall, you as the founder, how are you communicating the vision down? How are we talking to the organization about how we perform? And lateral communication and bottom-up communication. If something's broken, this is when founders start to get in an island and don't actually know what's going on in their company. It's like I said, this is an incredibly dangerous time. It's going to stretch your skill set as a founder.
Right. And your role as a founder changes. Like, that's what I think a lot of people get stuck on, is that, and one of the things we lose in high growth is that really intimate feel of well, communication and development and everything inside the organization, and that connection to each other. And that's honestly what probably helped you build a really successful product or service in the first place. And now that's becoming systematized. And to some degree, like, it's not that that's necessarily a bad thing, because to some degree that's going to happen as you grow, right? But you've got to figure out how to continue to capture and keep that intimacy inside the organization, because that's where all of the important knowledge kind of comes from, right?
I think you just hit on the last one in my mind, and I'm sure there's more about the big risk factors of what happens there. But I think this is the one where most of us as founders care about the most, is culture breaks at this point. And the culture of, we're all in the same boat, we're rolling together. There's no such thing as turf wars, because we're all just working to try to survive. Suddenly there gets to be people jockeying for power and position. There's this whole tier of what we call middle managers now. Middle managers oftentimes don't get the message right. They don't flow, information's not flowing. But for every founder that I know that have gotten through this, they are very, very focused on maintaining the culture of the organization. And it breaks during this time. And you as the founder, as the soul, as the heartbeat of the company, you have to double down on regenerating that culture. Does that resonate with you?
Right. But it's not just motherhood and apple pie, right? It's not like, oh, it's nice to have a nice culture. That's actually where all of the knowledge sharing comes from. That's where all of the through lines that are so important in this growth phase continue to be maintained or even strengthened. And culturally, culture is about how we communicate with each other, how we exist with each other, how we, our perspectives and our beliefs and all that sort of thing, right? It's pretty complex and it's pretty fundamental to the organization. And I want to come back to this role of the founder, right? Like, you as a founder, you're going to go through these evolutionary stages as your company grows. And I think that's one of the major things that happens, is that you as a founder have not caught up to who you need to be in this next phase of growth. And you may not even know what that is. And you may not be aware of the fact that you're going to have to make these changes. And I'm working with an executive director of a not-for-profit right now who is just going through this right now. She came out of being one of the team, and now she has to become a whole new leader inside the organization. And it means breaking her relationships or changing her relationships with the people who she worked with before. Like, it's all very complex, but that's what the organization needs. That's why it's not growing. That's why it's having trouble, is because the leader of the organization is still stuck in what I used to be.
So obviously people could talk to people like you, but I want to press on that, because one of the things that's most dangerous is, let's say that you, the founder, you built this incredible company, and I'll use my last company I sold. I built it to, let's say, 1.5 million in sales, services company, kind of boutique. I'm also the reason it got to 1.5 in sales. And I'm, in retrospect, the reason it did not get to 3 is because I kept breaking stuff because I got bored with that process. And in that time, I didn't have anybody to turn to that said the job to be done here is not that energy creative force. The job to be done is to be a systematic operator. And I had those skills. That's what I'm doing now. I'm a pretty decent operator, but I wasn't calling on those skills. I was still overusing my founder-related energy, creativity, a little bit chaos. I didn't have that person. How do we find those people that we can talk to during this phase? Because it is a different job. You stop becoming a founder and you start becoming a CEO, and those are very different roles.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a program called CEO Evolution for that very reason, because when CEOs step out of the doing role, like I'm one of the team and doing it, it's hard for them to do because they usually come from a doing role. Like that's where they started up the business in the first place, because they were a whatever, and they started by doing that. And then stepping out of that makes them feel like they're not doing something, like they're not participating, and the team's going to look at them like they're just being egotistical or whatever. But actually what the business really needs for them to do is like step into that next thing where their focus is on money now, and relationships and partnerships and like I don't want to necessarily say managing people, but building a team for sure that can and being smart about, like, you have to be able to keep that strategic view of your business all the time and not get sucked into, well, I have to be, my people aren't going to be happy because I'm not in there doing the work, and my people aren't going to be happy because I'm now, not as connected with them or what have you. It's a yes and thing, right? Like you can build the culture that keeps people feeling connected, but you have to teach people that you're now a new leader inside the organization.
So I think we've gotten to a couple of these points, but I want to codify this, which is the advice you would give yourself or another founder that's going through this phase. And I think we've said a couple of things, but just to say, to press on. Number one is that it's your job to maintain or rebuild the culture. Number two is your job is different. Our job titles on CEO on LinkedIn say CEO and founder, or founder and CEO. This is where you put the CEO in front of the founder, because right. Your job now is to become much more of a CEO-minded person than that energetic founder person. I want to ask you, and we talked a little bit about team and team dynamics, but there's a skill set here, which is hiring executives. And this is hiring people that can go take a big chunk of work, let's say a COO role, because a CEO typically is outward facing, the COO is typically inward facing, operationally focused. How do I start to think about that as a founder? I'm paying somebody a bunch of money, I'm giving them equity in the company. I need to find that right person who's going to be a very important part. And if you get it wrong, it can be devastating for a small company.
All right, I have an opinion here.
No, you never have an opinion, Stephanie.
This is why this is so hard, is because you have to find a unicorn. You have to find somebody at this stage who understands growth focused companies and who has also been like, they have the experience to know what we're shooting for, but they've also had the experience of working in a small high growth company where everything's different, right? So they're that bridge between those two. So you can't hire a COO who is coming out of some multi-billion-dollar organization. That's not going to work. They don't understand it. You also can't hire a super scrappy person who's used to working in startups, because you will not get past that. You will not get to the next stage. So that is a very important hire. All your sort of leadership team is going to be important hires, because they have to be that right, and don't skimp on that, right? Like, don't just go and hire somebody because they've got COO experience on their resume. You've got to look for the, like, that is your most important investment. I would say also, you need to ask yourself if you're ready to be a CEO. And I also think it's totally okay if you're not, because there are people who are innovators. There are people who are so, like this, especially I see in the tech industry, these really smart technical people who have an idea and build something and then cannot lead an organization. And it's okay if that's not the role you want to be in. Just because you were the inventor doesn't mean you need to be the CEO. So think about that too. Do you need to put a CEO in place?
I think about Yvonne from Patagonia. Like he was
Yeah.
rarely like he would step in as CEO, but then he'd hire somebody because he wanted to go climb and in his words, be a dirtbag, right? Like he didn't want to do the job.
Yeah.
But being the owner, there's one other piece I want to press on this side because we're talking about hiring the right people, but there's another piece to this, and it's a crappier conversation. Is you got to fire the right people too. And when I say fire, there is a group of people that you just came through hell with and that worked their asses off and that were like by you and committed, and you stayed up late and you went through this incredible journey with, and they're probably not the right person to go be a leader in this next level. And it's a terrible time because you have to look somebody who you genuinely care about and say, I'm sorry, you're not going to be the CEO. You don't have those skills. Even when you're feeling like an imposter and you're saying, like, I don't know that I've got the skills to be CEO. That's a very difficult thing to do. And I think it's actually harder than hiring the right person. I think it's moving somebody that's been in that role aside is really hard.
This conversation I just had yesterday with the same executive director of this organization. And the big mistake people make, and I'm going to come back to this because it's my little, hill to die on, but is that people are thinking about the functional job, right? So she's got, right now, their little organization needs a certain portfolio of skills, right? And they need certain tasks done, and they need certain, I want to say personalities, but that's not quite right. But they need certain personality profiles to be able to, if I were to look at a map of the organization and say, this is what's going to make this organization successful, this is what she needs. But she's got like 3 fact finders on her team, right? And so when you understand people and their motivations and their accountabilities and what they are driven by, you start to see that you've got a team of people that are really not a fit for what the organization actually needs. And I think that's a really hard conversation. It's not even about the people not being good at what they do. It's that your business needs this right now. And this is what no one is doing. They are not looking at the organization and saying, this is what we need, not functional roles, but like we need, yes, these tasks done, but we also need this portfolio of this profile of different types of people. And we also need this portfolio of how people work together, right? That's what the business needs right now. But if you start plunking people in who are all one type of portfolio, one type of, archetype, you're going to have a really tough. And so the people that you have around you right now might have been really good at what they were doing in that type of environment, because as people with their strengths, they happen to work in that type of environment really, really well. But once they start to get into the next phase, it's not a match. So I think it's less about,
it's classic, yeah.
It,
You
right?
hire a bunch of people that want to tell people what to do, and there's nobody left to do the shit. I've got a bunch of people that are looking around being like, let's delegate that. Like, to whom?
I think it's even deeper than that, right? It's like, if you're familiar with sort of, Clifton Strengths or your Colby or any of these things, there are these sort of archetypes of people, right? Activators, commanders, fact finders, like fact finders are totally motivated by going and learning things, right? Like they want to collect all of the information. And those people are really attracted to early stage companies because they get to learn a whole bunch of stuff. They just want to learn and learn and learn. And that's actually really good for the company in those early stages. But once you start to get into growth mode, now you have a need for people who are going to execute, right? People who are going to lead. You need commanders, you need activators, you need like whatever these profiles are. So that's what I'm talking about. Is like, yes, you have people who fit really nicely inside that first kind of early environment, but really, like, I'm one of those people. I'm really good in startups. I'm really good in like early stage because I am an activator, right? But you get me into a role inside of an organization where now I have to be routine and I have to, play a more narrow role. Like, I'm just not a good fit. I'm not a good fit as an employee anyway for anything, but you know what I mean? So this is what I don't think people understand. And it is the main reason that you struggle, you have high turnover when you're in high growth.
I mean, you get choked up talking about
I know, I do. So there's another piece of this, and I know that you can comment on this as well. There's another piece that's about money, right? So if you're in high growth, the way that I remember being in, like, I've worked in startups my entire life, and so many conversations are about money. How are we getting money? Where's money coming from? When you're in high growth, all of a sudden you have a different relationship with money and how the company is funded. So unless you're one of these unicorn organizations that manage to bootstrap themselves to success, you are likely borrowing money from somebody, whether it's debt, whether it's an equity capital, whatever it is. Now your job is to start to figure out how you're going to fund growth. And that becomes almost a full-time obsession for a CEO. It's like where most of your work is going to start to go, is now how do we fund growth? And there's so much that we don't think about that you need in order to fund growth. And I think a lot of CEOs and founders are still thinking pretty small, like bootstrappy. And I think that's a huge shift for them to make, to start thinking about big money, right? Like much bigger money than before. And you cannot grow by saying, well, we'll just take what we need, right? You actually have to think about what it means. And that's a whole different mindset, right? Do you agree?
Yeah. So it reminds me, there's an old saying, which is there's only 3 jobs a CEO has. And if you take any additional jobs, that's fine, but that's not your key job. Job number 1 is, how does the organization fund itself based on the plan that you and your team put together? Job 1 is money. It is your job to make sure that there's enough money for the organization to go achieve their goals based on the trajectory that you and your team have set. Number 2 is people. You have to have the right people in place. It is up to you to go find and recruit those people. And number 3 is the culture of the company. Everything else below that, you can hire for, you can delegate. If you're doing it, you have to question whether or not why. Are you doing the right thing? Are you making those things? Again, Steve Jobs, famous, was the product lead at the company. He didn't have to be. That was just where his strength was. But those 3 things for a CEO are non-negotiable. And to your point, oftentimes, particularly coming out of founder mode, we have a scarcity mindset. We just want to raise just enough. And we know how hard it is to raise money, et cetera. But there's another rule of thumb that I'm thinking about here, which is it always takes twice as long and it's twice as expensive as you have planned. That is one of the most universal truisms on anything in startup, Stephanie. It takes twice as long and it's twice as expensive as you think. I think back to every one of my projects, it's always taken twice as long and it's twice as expensive. Great plan, but it's twice as expensive.
So do you just budget twice as much?
Yeah.
I think so. There's that tension, right? There's that tension between like, okay, now I've borrowed money or I've gotten investment or whatever it is. And now I am accountable to somebody. And now I have to deliver something at a certain time and results at a certain time. And so now my focus and my like obsession becomes that. How do I now say, oh, well, it's going to take twice as long?
It's the book by Reid Hoffman, Blitzscaling, talks. This is what that book's about. It's about his experience with LinkedIn and PayPal,
Yeah.
and about how if you want to go down this route and you want to scale very quickly and you're in this growth mode, you probably need to raise more money than you think you do. And he's like, in some cases, you need to raise a lot more money than you think you do. It's like, it's just the way it is.
And I think you need to surround yourself with people who are going to be like, hey, hiring 500 people right now is probably not going to work. Like, whose idea was that?
Yeah.
How did you have a whole team of directors who are like, yeah, no, great. That sounds really good.
I have a story like of the guy who just loved this office space so much. Closed his A round, signed a 2-year lease on a gigantic piece of office space. His board got wind of it and went, "What the fuck are you doing?" and fired him like 2 months later, because it was it was a third of his budget or something. But he just wanted this office space. It was so cool, and so immediately the company failed because he rented too big of office space. Different sort of growth problems.
Well, we've talked about this a few times about the value of having like your sort of personal board of directors, right? I still think one of the most advisable things anyone can do going into becoming a founder. Okay. Last closing thoughts before we go into speed round.
I think that I love the way that you framed it. And I think it's so important is the company wants something at this point. And the best thing that you can do is the company is not you anymore. It's this thing. And you need to start looking about what the company needs and what the company needs from you as the CEO, not the founder. And I do think asking a lot of people that maybe getting some outside help, maybe getting a coach, maybe getting somebody that can come in and look at your organization to help you think through that. It's the right time to do that. And you shouldn't take it personally. You just have been so close to this problem that getting a little bit of perspective can be hugely beneficial at this phase.
Yeah, 100% agree. Okay. Are you emotionally ready for the speed round?
I'm never emotionally ready for the speed. I had to just get a quick cry there. Okay, I feel better.
It's okay to cry. As a 68-year-old man. Okay.
Oh.
Speed round.
74 years.
Yeah, I know. Your star performer resists the new systems. Do you replace them?
Yes. It sucks, but you gotta.
What percentage of revenue should fund your internal infrastructure?
It's a crappy answer, but it depends. If you're in hyper scaling, blitz scaling mode, very little. For the most of us mere mortals, you want to be somewhere between 30 and 60%.
Name the first process a growing company should formalize.
Hiring and onboarding.
Onboarding employees or onboarding customers?
Employees.
More damage, scaling a broken process or stopping to fix it?
Scaling a broken process, 10 out of 10.
Revenue growth or operational stability, which gets budget priority?
Revenue growth, and it sucks. Sorry, COOs, but it's always revenue growth.
All right, we got some deep dive resources: Mastering the Rockefeller Habits by Vern Harnish and The Great Game of Business by Jack Stack. And then you mentioned one as well, the Blitzscaling, which I think is also a really, really great one. Awesome conversation today. Chris, any last sort of parting thoughts?
No, just a terrific conversation. And it's conversations like this that make me love doing our podcast.
Amazing. Do you want to close us off?
Sure. I had a conversation with a founder last night, early stage founder, And it just reminded me how important it is for us to do this work and how incredibly fortunate I think that we are to get to do this virtually, to sit across the virtual table from founders and talk about the things that we've screwed up and learned down through the years, and just how important it is for founders to have somebody to have a conversation with. So we appreciate you. Continue doing the great work. You drive value in our society, and we are incredibly humbled to be here along the way. And if you like us, if you like Stephanie's hair this morning or my hair this morning, people that are listening aren't going to get the jokes.
I think yours is nicer.
Yeah. If you like us, maybe give us a like, maybe subscribe, maybe even write us a positive review. If you don't like us, just go review a different podcast. I appreciate that.
All right. Thanks, guys. Give us a follow, give us a like. Thank you for being here, and we will see you again on Monday.